What if a forest could grow not from soil, but from forgotten memories? In a land where time folds like parchment and trees whisper names no one remembers, a lost boy touches the hand of an old woman and awakens something ancient. A grove that should not exist. A girl who stepped out of a painting. A night soaked in eternal rain. A crown that rewrites history. This is no fairy tale. This is a forgotten truth, buried so deep in the past, it started growing roots in people's minds. The forest doesn't want worship. It wants to erase pain by replacing the truth. And only one memory, the final memory, can stop it. Enter the forest. Follow the boy. Unravel the lies. But beware, the trees remember everything. Subscribe now and start with part 1, before the forest forgets you too. There was once a village so far from the roads of kings and armies that no map dared remember its name. It sat quietly between low hills and sluggish rivers, where fog moved like thought and the wind spoke only in sighs. The villagers lived simply, tilling the same soil their grandfathers had turned, lighting lamps their grandmothers once kindled, and repeating the same stories around fires that had never truly gone out. In this village, time passed like a prayer, softly, slowly, with little change and even less curiosity. Until the day she came. No one saw her arrive. One moment the streets were empty. The next, there she was, standing in the middle of the square as if she had grown up from the earth itself. The baker's boy was the first to notice. He dropped his basket when he saw her, and the loaves tumbled into the dust. She wore a cloak so ragged it seemed made from forest shadows. Moss clung to her sleeves like it had taken root, and her long gray hair was threaded with pine needles. Her eyes were clouded, not with blindness, but with memory too heavy to hold. She stood there, barefoot, her toes curled into the dirt as though testing if the village was real. When she spoke, her voice was cracked and wind-worn. "I need to sit," she whispered, "before the forest finds me again." They gave her a bench. They gave her water. But no one dared come too close. It was the healer's apprentice, little Mira, who finally approached. She was only 10, and 10-year-olds have not yet learned to fear what grown men run from. She asked the old woman her name. The woman blinked. Twice. Her lips moved soundlessly. Then she shook her head. You don't remember." Mira tilted her head, curious. "Do you remember anything?" The old woman looked to the hills, to the line of trees beyond the last house. "I remember green, endless green, and silence, and a voice I think was my own, once, whispering to the leaves. I remember walking for years or maybe days. I remember the scent of cedar, and a forest that grows in people's memories. Maybe mine." The villagers gathered in a circle. They whispered among themselves. Forests didn't grow in memories. Forests grew in soil, watered by rain, rooted in time. But the old woman's hands smelled of cedar bark and fern. Her cloak was damp with dew though it hadn't rained in weeks. And her shadow, one old man swore it, flickered like leaves in wind that wasn't there. They let her stay the night. She slept in the granary, curled beneath burlap and old straw, and did not stir. Yet by morning, things began to change. The healer, who had once lost his wife and the memory of her face, woke in tears because that face had come back to him, clear as the moon in winter. The blacksmith found an old song in his throat he hadn't sung since childhood, taught to him by a mother long buried and forgotten. And Mira dreamed of walking in a green forest where the trees knew her name before she spoke it. When she awoke, a single pine cone sat beside her pillow. The village began to shift. Old stories returned. Forgotten paths reappeared. A well that had run dry for a decade filled with cold water overnight. Some called it blessing, others curse. But everyone agreed, the old woman had brought something with her, something ancient and waiting. When asked again who she was, she would only say, "I think I was someone once. Someone who knew the forest before it vanished." "Where is this forest?" they asked. She closed her eyes as if seeing something far away. "Nowhere," she said, "and everywhere. It's not a place on a map. It's a place inside. Inside people who've forgotten. Inside pain too heavy to carry. Inside truths no one dares speak aloud. It grows when people bury things. What kind of things? Her fingers trembled. Secrets, regret, love never confessed, lies lived too long. It feeds on what we forget. The villagers didn't know what to do with her. So they did what villagers do, they watched. Days passed. Her presence didn't fade. Birds returned that hadn't sung in years. Wildflowers bloomed in the dead corners of the square. And people began to remember. But not all memories are kind. A woman remembered a baby she had buried beneath a nameless hill. A man remembered a brother whose body had been left on a battlefield far from home. An elder remembered a truth he had hidden that shattered 3 lives and was never spoken of again. And still the forest grew. It wasn't seen yet, but it was felt. Beneath the skin, behind the eyes, in the gaps between heartbeats, whispers at the edge of hearing, dreams turning into stories, trees that never existed appearing in old paintings, a mirror that showed not reflection, but a memory. The blacksmith came to the square one morning with an axe in hand. He stood before the old woman. "What are you?" he asked, voice shaking. "You bring ghosts. You make us remember what we buried." The woman did not flinch. "I am only what was forgotten. I am memory returned. I am the price of silence." He raised the axe, but his hand would not move. It trembled, then dropped, and he fell to his knees, sobbing, not for her, but for himself, for the father he had betrayed, for the child he had raised in another man's name, for the forest now growing inside his guilt. That night, the village held a gathering. They asked the woman to leave. She nodded. "I understand, but I do not go far." "Where will you go?" "Back to the place between places, to the edge of the forest, to wait." "For what?" She looked up at the stars. "For the one who will remember it all, the one who will not run from memory, but walk into it." And then she walked, past the last house, beyond the fence, into the hills. But here is what no one noticed. As she passed, every tree she touched turned a deeper green. Every bird paused to watch her go. And behind her, in the path her bare feet made, grass grew. The next morning, Mira went to where the old woman had slept. She found something buried beneath the straw, a carved stone pendant, the shape of a leaf, and written on the back, in an old script even the healer couldn't read, were 3 words: "Do not forget." That night, Mira dreamed of the forest again. Only this time, she wasn't alone. A boy stood beside her, his chest marked by a red leaf. And somewhere far off, a voice whispered through the branches, "The forest remembers." And so began the tale of a forest that grew not in earth, but in the quiet corners of the soul. A forest not of bark and branch, but of memory and the ghosts we dare not name. In a cottage on the edge of the village, where the stones were older than names and the thatch always smelled of smoke, lived a boy named Rael. He was neither loud nor quiet, neither bold nor timid. He lived the way many children do in places time forgets, between chores and dreams, between the scoldings of his mother and the legends whispered by old men who remembered too much and spoke too little. Rael had seen the old woman. Everyone had. But while most watched from behind shuttered windows or half-closed doors, he had done something no one else had. He had reached out. Just before she left, he had taken her hand. It had been a small thing, an instinct. He saw her walking away, her shoulders bent not just from age but from carrying something invisible and heavy, and something within him reached out. Her hand was dry and rough, like bark left too long in the sun. She had looked at him then, her eyes cloudy and deep, and smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. And then she was gone. The next morning, Rael woke with a sharp sting in his chest, like the memory of a wound he hadn't felt. He pulled aside his tunic and saw it. Not a cut, not a bruise, but a mark. A red scar, perfectly shaped like a maple leaf, nestled just above his heart. It was not there the day before. He said nothing at first. Boys don't often speak of strange things. He traced the scar with his fingers. It didn't hurt. It didn't itch. But it felt alive. Warm even when the rest of him was cold. That day, as he helped his father gather firewood, he began to hear it. A soft rustling, like leaves caught in wind. But the air was still. The trees stood frozen. The sound came from nowhere, and everywhere. He turned his head once, twice. Nothing. His father noticed his unease and cuffed him lightly behind the ear. Dream later, Rel. The wood won't stack itself. That night, the sound came again, but louder. Not outside, inside, in his chest, in his thoughts. A rustling like whispers, words just beyond comprehension. He pressed a pillow over his ears, but the sound stayed. The next day, he couldn't take it. He showed Mira first, the healer's apprentice, who everyone said was touched by the gods because she remembered dreams like they were stories. Her eyes widened when she saw the mark. "You touched her," she whispered. He nodded. "It wasn't a mistake." "Then it's begun." "What has?" But Mira only shook her head and said, "Do you hear them too?" Rael stared. "The leaves." She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You're not alone." They met in secret for days after that. Mira spoke of dreams she'd had. Trees that moved like people. Faces in petals. Names written in raindrops. Rael told her about the whispers, the rustling, the pull he felt toward the woods. But then came the day the wind changed. It was a still morning. Too still. The birds did not sing. The dogs did not bark. And the village well was lined with leaves that hadn't been there the night before. Red ones. Maple. People began to talk. Rael heard his name in hushed tones. Saw glances held too long. Mothers pulled children away when he passed. The elder woodcutter crossed himself when their eyes met. He went to his mother, but even she flinched when she saw the mark. "It wasn't there before," she said, voice brittle. "I know," he whispered. "What have you done?" "Nothing. I just held her hand." She backed away. "Don't say that. Don't speak of her. She wasn't right. I think she gave me something." "No," his mother snapped. "She left something, and it's not a gift." That night, Rael ran. He didn't know where his feet were taking him, only that he had to get away. From the fear in his mother's eyes. From the silence of the villagers. From the weight of a scar that wouldn't fade. He ran toward the hills, toward the tree line. And there, just before the woods, he stopped. Because the trees were whispering. Not wind, not imagination. Words. Remember. He stepped closer. The scar on his chest pulsed, warm and firm like a heartbeat. His breath caught. The air smelled of cedar and soil. He took another step. Then something grabbed him. She had followed him. "You can't go in alone," she said, breathless. "Not yet." "Do you hear it too?" She nodded. "Always. But it's louder around you." "I think it wants me." "Of course it does. It grew from memory. And you remember things no one taught you." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "You speak old names in your sleep. You draw places no one's seen. You hum songs no one knows. It's in you, just like the forest." He stared at her. "How do you know all this?" "Because I dreamed of you. Before we met. Before the woman came." They sat together, just beyond the trees. The whispers calmed. The scar pulsed gently, like it was listening. Then Mira said, "The forest feeds on the forgotten. But maybe you can feed it back something different." Rael frowned. "Like what?" "Truth." That night, as Rael lay in his bed, the rustling changed. It became music, a soft melody carried through thought, not sound. He dreamed of a forest where the trees bowed to greet him, where every leaf told a story, where every root held a secret, and in the heart of it, a clearing, and in the clearing, a crown. When he awoke, he found his hands covered in dirt, and a single red leaf resting on his windowsill. The next few days were strange. Animals followed him. A fox sat at his door each morning. Crows perched above wherever he walked. Butterflies gathered around his path even when the skies turned gray. And people stopped speaking to him altogether, except for one, an old monk from the stone shrine at the edge of the village. He summoned Rael without warning. Rael entered the crumbling structure, its candles flickering weakly against the dusk. The monk looked at him with eyes too young for his face. "You bear the mark," he said simply. Rael nodded. "Then you must know, the forest chose you. It doesn't choose often, and never kindly." "What do I do?" The monk's lips twitched. "Listen. Remember. Walk carefully. And when the time comes, don't run." "Run from what?" "From the part of you that's still forgotten." The monk handed him a stone, cold and smooth, shaped like a maple leaf. Rael turned it over. On the back, etched in old language, was a word he didn't know. "What does it mean?" he asked. The monk sighed. "It means, begin." That night, as the village slept, Rael sat beneath the stars. The scar on his chest glowed faintly. Not with light, but with memory. He remembered a lullaby sung in a language he'd never heard. He remembered a woman in silver robes walking among trees made of glass. He remembered a crown breaking in two. And through it all, the forest whispered his name like a prayer. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, whispered back, "I remember." The air grew still, the stars dimmed, and the trees shuddered, not from wind, but from anticipation. Because something had awakened, not just in the woods, but in him. And the forest was listening, waiting, and ready. Rael hadn't slept for 3 nights. Not because he was frightened, though he was. Not because the forest kept whispering, though it did. Not because the scar on his chest burned beneath his tunic, though it pulsed like a second heart. He didn't sleep because every time he closed his eyes, he saw a world that wasn't his. At first, it was flickers, a flash of silver armor beneath a bleeding sun, a crown wreathed in flames, a man falling to his knees in a circle of stone. But then the flickers became shapes. The shapes became scenes. The scenes became memories. Memories he could not possibly have lived. And yet they lived in him. He began to draw them, not with thought, but with instinct. His fingers would move on their own, sketching with charcoal on scraps of old parchment. A knight with silver hair standing in a ruined forest, his sword driven into the earth. A shrine buried beneath a mountain, guarded by a weeping statue. A crown made of gold and bone, burning in a basin of black fire. By the 5th day, his room was full of them. Walls papered with memories. Pages on the floor like fallen leaves. Drawings in the margins of old books, on the backs of spoons, in the soot on his windows. He could no longer tell which thoughts were his. When he passed through the village, people turned away. Not in cruelty, but in fear. One woman murmured a prayer. A boy threw a stone. Rael didn't flinch. He was too tired, too full of things he didn't understand. Only Mira stayed near. She watched him draw, silent and wide-eyed. "You've never seen these places," she whispered once. Rael shook his head. "Not with my eyes. Only in the memories." "Whose memories?" "That's the part that scares me," he said. "I don't think they belong to just one person." He drew the night again. Always the night. Standing alone, face half hidden beneath a silver helm, eyes that had seen too much. There was sorrow in that stance. Sorrow and purpose. And always that crown. He didn't know why it burned, or why it mattered. But he knew this. The forest was no longer just whispering. It was showing him things, giving him fragments. Pieces of something too large to fit in one life. Something ancient. Something buried. And it wanted him to see. One morning, the village's well turned black. The water was fine, but the stone around it was scorched. No fire had touched it. No lightning struck. But the rock looked burned, as if memory itself had seared it. The healer declared it a sign. The blacksmith called it a curse. The children were kept indoors. That evening, Rael found a new drawing in his satchel. He didn't remember making it, but there it was, a face, half melted by fire, wearing the same crown from his visions. And behind the face, trees. Trees made of bone. The monk summoned him. The boy stood before the altar in the ruined shrine, hands ink-stained, eyes wide with dreams he hadn't chosen. The old monk studied him, not with suspicion, not with pity, but with recognition. "The forest has chosen you," the monk said softly. Rael didn't ask what that meant. He simply nodded. The monk picked up one of the drawings, the burning crown, and traced its outline with a finger. "I have seen this before," he said. Rael blinked. "Where?" "In a dream," the monk replied. "But it was not my dream. It was passed to me by my teacher, and his before him. A memory carried across time like a seed waiting for the right soil." He held up the paper. "You are the soil." Rael didn't speak. The monk continued, "There was once a knight who betrayed a king. Not with sword, not with words, but with silence. He watched the king don the crown. He knew it was cursed. He said nothing. Why? Because he loved the king." Rael's throat tightened. "Did the king die?" "No," said the monk. "Something worse. He forgot who he was, and became something else." "What happened to the knight?" The monk looked away. He swore an oath that no memory of the crown would survive. He scattered them across time, into dreams, into echoes, into children not yet born. Rael's fingers went to his scar. "Why me?" "Because you touched her, and she remembered you." Rael sat on the cold stone floor. He felt the memories stirring again. The shrine beneath the mountain, the burning crown, the night silence. But now, something else. A song, soft and sorrowful, sung by a woman with eyes like mirrors. He drew again, not with haste, but with reverence. The woman took shape, hair like night, hands outstretched. A single word on her lips, "Return." Mira entered, silent as always, and knelt beside him. "You're changing," she said. "I'm remembering." "Things that never happened?" "No," he said. "Things that were made to seem like they never happened." She looked at the drawing. "Who is she?" Rael touched the page. "I think she was the last to wear the crown, and the first to regret it." That night, the village held a gathering. They spoke of the drawings, of the burned well, of the boy who spoke of nights and curses and dreams that didn't belong to him. They asked the monk if he believed it was safe. He said only, "It is not safe, but it is necessary." Some wanted Rael gone. Others feared what would follow if he left. In the end, they decided to wait. But not everyone was patient. The next morning, someone tried to burn the shrine. The fire was hot, angry, lit with fear. It burned the grass. It burned the altar. But it didn't burn the drawings. They remained untouched. And on the wall, where no one had drawn, a new image appeared. A path through a forest, marked with names no one had spoken in generations. The villagers wept, some out of fear, some out of memory, some because they saw their own childhood etched in charcoal. Rael stood before it all, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a boy. He felt like something older, like something that had waited a long time to return. Mira took his hand. "You were never just you," she said. He nodded. "I don't know how this ends," he whispered. "That's because it hasn't been remembered yet." They walked together to the edge of the village. The trees bowed in the windless night. And somewhere, deep within the woods, a knight looked up from his vigil. The crown was gone, but the memory had returned. And with it, the forest began to grow again. Not in soil, but in truth, in silence, in Rael. And the forest was watching, listening, and waiting. For 7 nights, Rael dreamed the same dream. A hill, rounded like a sleeping beast beneath a silver sky. A stone stairway buried beneath moss and time. A shrine forgotten by the world, its doorway sealed with vines that pulsed like veins. And a voice, never loud, never urgent, only steady, whispering in the dark, "One memory must be returned." Each morning, he woke with damp soil on his hands and green stains on his feet, though his windows were shut and his room sealed. His mother stopped speaking to him altogether. The villagers no longer pretended to be polite. Children were kept indoors when he passed. His drawings were taken down by trembling hands and burned in secret behind shuttered barns. Only Mira remained at his side, her presence as constant as the scar above his heart. She said nothing when he told her of the dreams. She only nodded as if she'd expected them all along. On the 8th day, Rael could no longer resist the pull. He left before sunrise, a satchel of charcoal and bread over one shoulder, and walked beyond the fields, past the bent trees and the frost-kissed stones, to where the land rose in a gentle swell, the hill from his dream. It looked like nothing, really, covered in moss and scrub, as dull and quiet as the rest of the countryside. But he knew, the way a heart knows its wound. This was the place. He began to dig, not with shovel or blade, but with bare hands, clawing through roots and old grass until the earth gave way beneath his fingers. Stone met skin, smooth, worn, ancient. He swept aside the soil to reveal a step, then another, a stairway leading down into darkness. He hesitated only once, then descended. The air was cold, the kind of cold that settles in bones and memories. He moved slowly, his fingers brushing mossy walls, until the steps ended in a low corridor sealed with thick vines. They pulsed faintly, like a breath. Rail reached out. The moment his hand touched the green, something stirred. Not the vines, his scar. It burned. Not with pain, but with purpose. The vines recoiled at his touch and withered in seconds, revealing a stone doorway carved with symbols he had never studied but somehow understood. They spoke of oaths, a betrayal, of something once lost that now sought return. He stepped through. The shrine was small, barely larger than a peasant's cottage. A single stone altar sat in the center, cracked and dust-covered. Around it, faint murals climbed the walls, images of a forest made of flame, a crown bound in chains, and a woman with silver eyes and ivy in her hair. He felt dizzy, like the air had thickened. The whisper returned, not in his ears but in his blood. One memory must be returned. Rail approached the altar. There, resting on the stone, was a vine. Dormant. He touched it. It came to life. The vine slithered up his arm, around his shoulder, down his side, until it coiled around his leg like a serpent. He should have panicked. But the fear did not come. Only knowing. The vine whispered, "Memory is a burden, but also a gate." Rail whispered back, "What am I supposed to remember?" The shrine grew quiet, the kind of quiet that breaks minds. Then images came, not as dreams, not as drawings, as memories, alive. He saw a kingdom cloaked in fog, ruled by a queen who spoke in riddles and ruled in silence. A forest surrounding it, changing shape with thought. He saw the silver-haired knight, not in armor, but as a boy, kneeling before a mirror, repeating names he had been forced to forget. And he saw himself, or someone who looked like him, standing in the same shrine, centuries ago, holding a torch before a woman bound in vines. Her eyes were filled with tears and fire. "You said you'd never return," she whispered. He, or the one who wore his face, lowered the torch. "I had to forget, to survive." Her answer was cold. "You forgot me." And then the shrine collapsed in flame. Rail gasped. The vine tightened. "You are not the first," it hissed. "But you may be the last. What do you want from me?" Rail demanded. The vine loosened. "Return what was taken." What was taken? Her name. The murals flickered. The silver-eyed woman appeared again, but her mouth had no shape. Her name had been carved out of the world. "She was the first," the vine whispered. "She planted the forest in her own mind to protect it, and then gave that forest to others. But too many forgot. Too many feared. So the forest went hungry, and now it feeds on fragments." Rail understood. The shrine was not a place of worship. It was a place of memory, of return. He stood before the altar and placed both hands on the stone. "I will remember her." The vine withdrew. The shrine pulsed. A breeze swept through, though no doors had opened. And then, a voice, soft and broken. "You came back." Rail turned. She stood there. The woman from the dream. From the mural. Silver eyes. Ivy hair. Skin marked with forgotten runes. "You found it," she said. "I don't know your name," Rail said, "but I remember your sorrow." She smiled, and it was terrible and kind at once. That's where remembering begins. Rail stepped forward. "What do I call you?" She leaned in and whispered. The name shattered in his mind like a bell. Too deep, too old, but it rooted itself behind his scar, and he knew it would never leave. The woman faded. The altar glowed faintly, and then the shrine grew quiet again. Not empty, just waiting. Rael returned to the village as dusk fell. He said nothing, but Mira saw his eyes. She knew. The monk met him at the square. Rael handed him a stone, taken from the shrine's floor, with a name carved into its surface. The monk trembled as he read it. She lives. Rael nodded. In memory. That night the wind changed. The trees sighed, and for the first time in 100 years, the forest sang. Not in fear, in hope, because someone had remembered, and the forest, so long twisted in sorrow, stirred with something new. A beginning, a return, and far beneath the sleeping hill, the vine whispered to stone, "One memory has been returned." The square was never loud. Not in this village. It had seen weddings, lamplight feasts, and once, the silent mourning of a passing king, but never noise. Even when the wind carried festival music or oxen hooves echoed along the stone path, the square remained wrapped in a hush, like a chapel without walls. So when a strange man arrived one morning, towing a cart draped in velvet and pulling a tired mule behind him, the villagers gathered, not to celebrate, but to watch. Suspicion held them in place, yet curiosity moved their feet. The man was a painter. His coat was patched, his fingers stained in every color imaginable, his beard streaked with the blue of river skies. He said little. He smiled much. And when he pulled back the velvet and revealed the canvas beneath, no one dared speak. It was a girl. In a forest none of them recognized, though a few blinked and felt, without understanding why, a stab of familiarity. The trees behind her were wrong. Too tall, too symmetrical. Their leaves shimmered, not green, but silver blue, and the ground beneath her bare feet glowed faintly with a light that could never come from any sun. Her hair flowed like smoke. Her eyes were open wide, staring directly forward, not at the painter, not at the viewer, but at something beyond. Mira grabbed Rael's arm and whispered, "That's not a painting." Rael's mouth was dry. "I've seen her," he said, "in the shrine, in the dreams." The painter stood beside the canvas and said in a gravel-soft voice, "She came to me. I didn't imagine her. She stood beneath a tree I couldn't name and told me to remember. So I painted her. I don't know where she's from. I only know she asked to be seen." No one moved. The girl's image held them still. But as dusk approached and the velvet cloth returned to its place, Rael felt the whisper again. The forest wasn't done. That night, a storm rolled in without warning. No thunder, no rain. Only a wind that howled without touching branches, a pressure in the chest, and a restlessness that made sleep impossible. Rael woke in darkness, drawn toward his window. And there, in the square, beneath the velvet tarp flapping in the wind, stood the girl. Not a painting, not a dream. Her feet were bare, just as they had been on canvas. Her skin shimmered slightly, as though lit from within. Her eyes found Rael's without hesitation. He ran. By the time he reached the square, the velvet had fallen. The cart lay toppled. The painter nowhere to be seen. The girl turned slowly. "You heard the forest," she said. Rael nodded. "You came from the painting." "No," she whispered. "The painting came from me." Mira joined them moments later, panting, her eyes wide with unspoken questions. The girl stared at both of them. "You have the scar," she said to Rael. "And you," she turned to Mira. "You were once a branch." Mira tilted her head. "What does that mean?" The girl didn't answer. Instead, she walked, light as wind, to the stone well at the center of the square. She stared into it. "This world is forgetting faster than I imagined." Rael stepped closer. "Who are you?" She closed her eyes. "I don't have a name anymore. The forest took it when I left. It's how it keeps itself safe." "You left the forest?" She nodded. "Long ago, when it was still soft, when it still wept." "Why?" "To find someone." "Who?" Her eyes met his. "You." The silence that followed was deep, ancient. Rael didn't speak. He didn't know how to ask the hundreds of questions screaming behind his ribs. She sat on the edge of the well, barefoot toes tracing invisible shapes in the dust. "I was born there," she said softly, "in the part of the forest where memory grows brightest, where names are planted like seeds. I was meant to stay, but I was curious. I wandered too far, and the forest called me back. But I didn't return. I couldn't. I was too rooted here." She placed her hand on her chest. Rael saw it then, veins beneath her skin that pulsed not red, but green, like vines. "I've been walking the border ever since," she whispered. "Too human for the forest, too forest for the world." Mira knelt beside her. "And now?" The girl looked up. "I'm losing myself. This world is too loud, too heavy. I forget why I came." Rael crouched. "You said you were looking for me." The girl reached out and touched the scar on his chest. "You remember too much," she said, "and not enough. You carry pieces of lives you never lived. Fragments, echoes. They've been placed in you for a reason, to bring something back." "What?" "The forest's heart." Rael blinked. "I don't understand." "You will." She stood suddenly, swaying. The veins on her arms darkened. Mira gasped. "Your roots." The girl looked down. Tiny shoots had begun to sprout from her heels, pushing through the stone into the dirt. "I don't have long," she said. "Once the roots take hold, I won't be able to move. I'll become part of this place. Can we help?" "Relat." The girl nodded slowly. "There is a path, a hidden one, through memory, through the places people pretend never existed. If you can find the gate, I might make it home." "Where's the gate?" Her eyes darkened. "Where the first name was forgotten." Rael felt something stir inside him, a vision, a child, weeping in a cradle made of branches, a lullaby sung by a woman with a broken voice, and a single name carved into the bark of a tree, then slashed out by a trembling hand. He stumbled back. "I've seen it." She grabbed his wrist. "Then guide me." They left the square. The painter was never seen again. The canvas vanished with the morning sun. But footprints, bare, delicate, strange, remained on the stones. As the villagers whispered behind doors and tightened curtains, Rael led her and Mira through the fields, past the weeping trees, to a hollow where silence had always lingered. A place no one went, a place even maps ignored. The hill there was small, but the shadows it cast stretched too far for its size. The girl knelt before a patch of earth. "This is where it began," she whispered. She placed her hand on the soil. Rael watched. The roots in her legs twitched, but then retreated. A soft glow rose from the ground, and beneath the moss they found it. A name, carved in ancient script, almost erased, almost gone, but still there. The girl read it and wept. "I remember," she said. "I remember who I was." The wind changed. The sky brightened, and for a moment, the forest in the distance swayed, as if relieved. Rael took her hand. Her skin no longer shimmered. Her eyes no longer glowed. She looked human, but more than human. She looked whole. "I can go back now," she said, "but I'll need your help." "I'll come," Rael said. Mira nodded. "We both will." The girl smiled, and as the stars blinked awake above, she whispered the name aloud. The ground trembled, and somewhere, far away, the forest sighed, because a name had been returned, and with it, the path began to open. At the far end of the village, where the stone paths turned to muddy trails and the birds never sang too loud, stood the old woman's hut. It had remained untouched since her departure. No one entered. No one disturbed the crooked walls or the mossy roof. Even the rats stayed away, as if they too sensed that something ancient had passed through and left a shadow behind. The villagers had spoken often of burning it, but the firewood always rotted near its doorstep. A storm always came when they gathered the oil. Doors would jam. Torches would sputter. Some swore they heard whispering in the thatch when the wind picked up, words not meant for living ears. So the hut remained, until the tree began to grow. It started with a creak. One cold morning, A low groan echoed across the fields, a sound like timbers snapping under snow. The blacksmith was the first to hear it, then the baker, then children, all at once, crying from sleep. They pointed toward the edge of the village. The hut. Rael, Mira, and the girl with no name were already on their way. They reached the house before the rest. The door stood half open, not broken, invited. A trail of roots had broken through the bottom crack, curling outward into the earth like searching fingers. Inside, the floorboards had split, and from beneath the old woman's bed, where she had slept the night she arrived, rose a sapling. But it wasn't like any sapling Rael had ever seen. The bark shimmered with silver-blue veins, like starlight caught in wood. Its leaves whispered without wind. Its roots shifted, slowly, like they were moving through memory, not soil. The girl stepped forward and knelt before it. "It's begun," she said. Rael stood still. "What's begun?" "The forest is reclaiming." "Reclaiming what?" She placed her hand gently on the bark. "Not what? Who?" Myra's eyes narrowed. "You mean the old woman?" The girl nodded. "She belonged to it. She gave herself to it long ago. But she left before her memory fully returned. This is the forest retrieving what was never meant to be lost." Rael stepped closer. "You said she planted the forest in her mind, that she carried it with her." "She did," the girl whispered, "and she buried parts of it in others, in dreams, in names, in children. But even the forest forgets sometimes, and now it remembers her, so it comes to collect." By nightfall, the tree had doubled in size. The roof split. The roots pushed into walls, lifting stones with ease. The villagers came in quiet procession, stopping at the edge of the garden, mouths full of fear. No one spoke. They only stared. One man finally asked, "Should we cut it down?" The girl turned to him. "Would you cut down your grandmother's bones?" He paled and said no more. By the next morning, birds had arrived, not the kind known in the valley. Their feathers shimmered like the tree's bark. They circled once, twice, then landed among its branches and began to sing. Not songs, but memories. Whole stories, in notes and rhythm, that made even the most hardened villagers weep without knowing why. Children swayed in their sleep. Elders woke speaking names they'd forgotten for years. And still the tree grew. Rael watched it each day, eyes distant, fingers twitching with the need to draw. But no parchment captured its shape. Every time he sketched it, the image shifted, branches in new patterns, leaves shaped like unfamiliar faces, a trunk that sometimes split in two, sometimes stood alone. The tree refused to be remembered by ink. It demanded presence. On the seventh day, it bore fruit. Round, pale, veined with gold, like small hearts. One dropped to the ground and cracked open. Inside was a memory, a real one. Rael saw it not with eyes, but soul. The old woman as a young girl, walking barefoot through the forest, her hands touching each tree as if greeting old friends. She was smiling, laughing, singing a song of no words. Around her, the forest grew in rhythm. It grew for her, through her. Then came the fire. Men with torches. Screams. The girl ran. The forest wept. And so she forgot. Rael fell to his knees. "She ran from something," he whispered. The girl nodded. "From forgetting. From pain. From a love that betrayed her." The villagers asked no more questions after that. They began to bring gifts. Old books. Locks of hair. Forgotten trinkets buried in chests. Things they didn't understand, only that the tree asked gently, and they couldn't refuse. The girl guided them. She taught them how to speak without words, how to offer without names. And the tree accepted. One night, a boy approached with tears in his eyes and placed a broken toy at the roots. The next day, he woke remembering a father who had died when he was small. And for the first time, he remembered his laugh, not just his silence. Another man brought the blade his brother had used in war. The tree bent gently as he placed it down. The next morning, he wept, not for the battles, but for the meals they used to share after them. Each gift returned a memory, and each memory fed the forest. But not all memories are kind. One morning, a branch turned black, then another. and from the roots a scream rose, not sound, but pain. Mira fell to the ground, clutching her chest. Rael caught her. "What did you see?" he asked. She looked up, her eyes full of sorrow. Someone gave it something twisted. A memory of cruelty. A betrayal. The forest wasn't ready. The girl approached the tree and placed her hand on the darkened bark. She whispered a name none of them had ever heard. And the blackness faded. Rael turned to her. "What did you do?" "I reminded it why it was made. To remember, not to judge." That night, the girl didn't sleep. She sat beside the tree, her fingers weaving through the roots, singing softly in a language older than rain. Rael joined her before dawn. She didn't look at him. She only asked, "Would you let it take something from you if it meant saving someone else's memory?" He thought carefully, then said, "Yes." She finally turned. "Then tomorrow we find the gate." Mira stepped forward. "Where?" The girl pointed at the tree. "Through here. It has remembered enough. The path will open." "But where does it lead?" Left. The girl looked toward the horizon, to the first forgetting, to the place where the forest was born. "And after that?" She smiled. "We'll see." The next morning, the tree opened. Not with sound, not with force, just a parting of bark. A doorway. Behind it, not darkness, not light. A shimmer, a memory not yet lived. Rael stepped forward. Mira took his hand. The girl with no name stepped through first, and the forest sighed, because what was lost was finally ready to be found. The road to the village had been quiet for weeks. No traders, no priests, no peddlers of talismans or fortune-hungry pilgrims had passed through. It was as though the world had paused around the edge of that place, holding its breath while the forest at its heart remembered itself. Then came the swordsman. He arrived just after dusk. The sky had turned bruise purple, and the stars blinked warily through drifting mist. His boots were dust-caked, his cloak torn, and a thin line of dried blood marked the side of his temple. Yet he walked with the bearing of someone who had once commanded rooms with silence alone. The villagers gathered, watching him lean his sword against the well and sit on the stone lip like he had been there before. He said little, only that he needed food, water, and shelter. The rest of his words came later, carried on wind and firelight. He called himself a prince, but had no name, no crest, no tale to prove it, only the certainty that once, long ago, he had ruled, or had been destined to, and that something had taken that from him. "I remember a throne," he said softly, eyes distant. "Emerald stone, cold to the touch. I remember kneeling before it, though I do not know why. And a grove, forbidden, locked behind doors that no key could open." Rael stood among the gathered crowd, heart thrumming. He stepped forward. The scar above his heart pulsed. The girl at his side nodded without looking. "Touch him." Rael hesitated, then reached out. His fingers brushed the swordsman's wrist. The world shifted. Rael gasped as visions thundered through him. A vast hall lined with green fire. Pillars grown from twisted trees. A boy, young, proud, raising a silver sword before a silent crowd. An emerald throne at the center, wrapped in ivy, pulsing like a heart. And behind it, a grove sealed by runes older than stone. The boy walked toward it, and was never seen again. Rael staggered back. The swordsman's eyes locked with his. "You saw it," he whispered. "I saw your memory," Rael replied. The swordsman stood. "Then you know I'm not lying." "You aren't," Rael said. "But it's not your memory alone." The villagers murmured. Some believed. Most doubted. A man claiming royalty without proof was a dangerous thing, even in forgotten villages. But Rael and Mira exchanged a look. They knew. The forest was opening minds, stretching through time, rooting into those with forgotten pasts and fractured truths. The girl stepped forward. "Show me your hand," she said to the swordsman. He obeyed. She examined his palm, tracing the lines that curled like rivers into a center no one had noticed, a mark. Faint but undeniable. A leaf, not burned like Rael's, but pressed into the flesh like a birthright. "You carry the seal of the Grove-born," she said. The swordsman blinked. What does that mean? You are a child of the forest, but not raised in it. Planted somewhere else. Forgotten by design. Hidden by someone or something who feared what you might become. He looked down. I remember walking a path of feathers. I remember rain that fell upward. I remember a woman with a veil of gold. Rael shivered. I've dreamed of her. So have I, Mira added. The girl looked past the village, toward the trees. The veil was woven from regret, she said. She was the keeper of the forgotten names. If she touched you, your past became hers. The swordsman whispered, then I must have been touched. The days that followed were uneasy. The villagers kept their distance. They offered the swordsman food, but only when Rael vouched for him. The children called him the Lost Prince behind their hands. But strange things began to happen where he walked. Flowers bloomed in footprints. Old dogs remembered commands they hadn't followed in years. A blind woman claimed she could hear colors when he passed by. The girl grew stiller with each passing day. The forest is reaching further than I expected, she said one evening. It's not just memories anymore. It's waking up parts of people, roots they didn't know they had. Rael asked, what happens if too many remember at once? She answered without blinking. The forest becomes real, everywhere. Isn't that good? She looked at him. Only if they remember the truth, not just the stories. That night, the swordsman sat by the well again. Rael joined him. I saw the grove in your memory, Rael said. Why was it forbidden? The swordsman's voice was low. Because it was where kings were made. Or unmade. You had to pass through it to take the throne. But not all who entered came out whole. What happened to you? I don't know, he said. But something followed me out. Something that didn't belong. Rael's scar burned. What if the forest put something in you? He asked. Something it needed to hide? The swordsman stared at him. Then maybe I was never meant to remember. The next day, a child vanished. Her name was Tella. 5 summers old, wild hair, always barefoot. She wandered too close to the edge of the woods. When her mother called, she didn't return. The village searched for hours. Then Mira found her sitting in the roots of a willow, unharmed, smiling. When asked what she had seen, she answered, I met a tree that spoke my name. It said I had a brother in the leaves. The villagers were shaken. Tella had no siblings. But Rael felt the forest's laughter in the wind. It was playing with bloodlines, digging up truths buried so deep they had become legend. That night, the girl approached the swordsman. You need to go to the grove, she said. He nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. Rael frowned. You don't know where it is. The girl looked at Mira, then back at him. No, but I know someone who does. She placed her hand on Rael's chest and whispered a name. Rael staggered. Another vision. Another flood of memory not his. A map, not ink, but thought. A hill with a bleeding tree. A cave beneath a silver moon. A mirror made of bark. Rael gasped. I know where it is. The swordsman stood. Then we leave tomorrow. The villagers watched them pack. No one spoke. But one old woman offered a vial of tears saved from her daughter's wedding. A man gave them a feather from a bird he'd buried with his son. Rael understood. They were giving memories, not words. Offerings to open paths no road could find. As the sun set, the swordsman turned to Rael. If I don't come back. You will, Rael said. The prince smiled. Then I hope I come back whole. They vanished into the trees. And behind them, the forest leaned forward. Listening. Waiting. Because the throne of emerald stone still stood. And the grove of kings was ready to remember. The map Rael saw in the memory was unlike any drawn by ink or etched in stone. It had no borders, no cardinal directions, no names of kings or rivers. It was shaped by feeling, by the scent of lilac, the chill of forgotten rain, and the ache of a secret too long kept. They followed it anyway. Rael, Mira, the nameless girl, and the swordsman who called himself Prince moved through valleys that never seemed the same twice. One morning, they walked past fields of blue wheat bending in the wrong direction. Another night, They camped beside a pond where their reflections spoke back with different expressions. This was not a road of distance. It was a road of remembering, and the forest, ever watchful, allowed them passage. On the fourth day, the sky changed. It darkened at midday, not with clouds, but with silence. Birds fell quiet. The air smelled of old parchment and stone warmed by candlelit. The girl pointed toward a rise in the land, covered in roots and moss. "There," she whispered, "the temple, the one the forest forgot." No one asked why a forest would forget a temple. Some things were built not to be worshipped, but to be hidden. They climbed the slope in silence. The trees thinned and then broke. Ahead stood a ruin of black marble, half sunk into the hill as though the earth had tried to swallow it and failed. Pillars lay cracked in the moss. Vines hung like curtains. The doorway was choked with ivy that recoiled at the girl's presence, letting her pass without touch. Inside, the temple smelled of dust, moonlight, and something gentler. Lavender, maybe, or the memory of lavender. It was dim, but not dark. Faint light pulsed from the stone walls themselves. The group walked slowly. The air was heavy, not with heat, but meaning. The kind of weight that pressed against the heart, demanding reverence. Then Mira gasped. On the far side of the room, blooming from the cracks in the stone floor, grew a flower. Pale gold, translucent. Each petal glimmered with movement. They stepped closer. Within the bloom, moving like light caught in water, was a vision. A woman in battle, armor cracked, blood on her lip. She stood on a hill of the dead, sword raised. And in her other hand, a child, wrapped in cloth, sleeping. The flower pulsed, then faded. Another bloom opened beside it. This time, a child rocked in a cradle while a lullaby drifted across the petals, sung in a voice too soft to be remembered clearly, but warm enough to make Mira cry. "Are these memories?" Relat. The girl nodded. "Ones that were given away, or stolen. The temple holds them like seeds." "Why?" the swordsman asked. She looked at him. "Because memories shape the forest, and the forest once shaped the world." They moved deeper into the temple. Every few steps, another flower bloomed. Each showed a moment, a betrayal behind a curtain of pearls, a hand letting go of another at a cliff's edge, a wedding where the bride whispered someone else's name, a village burning, a bell tolling, a soldier laughing and weeping at once. Rael stumbled. The memories were overwhelming. Not his, yet they clung to his ribs like old pain. The girl touched his shoulder. "It's too much for most, but not for you." "Why not?" "Because your soul has room." That didn't feel like a compliment. They reached the center of the temple. A pedestal stood there, blank. Around it, dozens of blooms, brighter than the rest. Mira touched one. A scream echoed across the chamber. She recoiled. Inside the bloom, a woman was being dragged through snow by faceless guards. She clutched a necklace. She looked straight through the petals and through time into Myra's eyes. "She knew me," Mira whispered. "Or will," said the girl. "What is this place?" the swordsman asked. The girl answered, "It is the temple of given things." Rael frowned. "What does that mean?" When the forest was young, people gave parts of themselves to keep it growing. Not blood, not flesh, but memory. They came here, to this temple, and placed what they could not carry alone into these stones. And in return, the forest offered protection, healing, power. She gestured at the blooms. "These are the fragments left behind. Can we take them back?" Mira asked. The girl hesitated. "Some, but not all. You must take them into yourself. And once you do, they become yours. Their pain, their truth, their cost." Rael stepped forward. A bloom opened. Inside, he saw a man, face like his own, but older, kneeling in a field of white feathers. Around him, broken arrows. Above him, a shadow with wings. Rael blinked, heart pounding. "That was me. Or will be," the girl said. "The forest doesn't follow time. It follows memory." He looked at the pedestal. "Why is that one empty?" The girl's expression turned grim. That was where the first memory was placed. The first forgetting. the one that allowed the forest to exist. It has been taken. By who? No one knows, but the forest is still looking. Rael stepped closer to the pedestal. Something stirred. A whisper, not of words, but of breath once held. And a vision, a child watching her village burn, holding a single petal in her fist. A voice saying, "You must forget to survive." He staggered. Mira caught him. The swordsman unsheathed his blade. "We shouldn't stay long." The girl agreed. This temple only opens when the forest wills it, and it closes without warning. As they turned to leave, a bloom opened on its own. The image inside was dark, but clear. A boy, standing before an emerald throne. The prince gasped. "That's me." Rael saw it too, but not just him. Behind the boy stood Rael, and Mira, and the girl, all three older, and in the prince's hands, the burning crown. The vision vanished. The bloom shriveled. Rael whispered, "That hasn't happened yet." The girl answered, "No, but it might." Outside, the forest was still, too still. The trees watched them leave, and as they crossed the threshold of the temple, it closed behind them. Stone sealed itself with vines, as though it had never opened at all. Rael looked at the others. "We saw the future." "Maybe," Mira said, "or maybe we saw a memory someone left behind before it ever came true." The girl stared into the woods. The forest doesn't remember the way we do. It remembers what might have been, what was dreamed, what was feared. The prince tightened his grip on his sword. "Then we must be careful what we leave behind." That night, the group camped beneath silverbark trees, and as they slept, flowers bloomed around them, soft, glowing, and silent. Each carried a memory, waiting, and the forest breathed, because someone had stepped into the temple, and memories had begun to stir. At dawn, the village woke to birdsong they didn't recognize. It was sweeter, more layered, like 10 voices singing the same note from different centuries. The air was thicker, not humid, full, like breath held in the belly of the world and now slowly being exhaled. Old Bren was the first to see it. He had walked the same path every morning since the war that never happened. At least, that's what they said, and yet when he reached the crest of the eastern hill, his feet stopped of their own will. A forest now stood where nothing had been yesterday. Not a few trees, not a sapling grove. An entire forest. Dozens, hundreds of tall, rooted giants. Trunks twisted like vines, leaves silver on one side, copper on the other. The grass around them bent outward, not inward, as though the trees had arrived from beneath, pushing the world away. Bren blinked, rubbed his eyes, cursed softly, and returned to the village. No one believed him. Not until they followed him and saw it. The field that had once held sheep and songs now pulsed with forest, and the trees were breathing. The villagers stood in stunned silence. Some crossed themselves, others whispered prayers. The children didn't speak at all. They simply stared, as if recognizing something no adult could understand. The girl with no name arrived at the edge of the grove and knelt. Rael stood beside her. The scar over his heart throbbed like a waking drum. Myra's fingers dug into his arm. "They weren't here yesterday," she said. "No," the girl whispered, "but they were always meant to be." The swordsman arrived last, sword unsheathed. Rael gave him a look. "It won't help," Rael said. "I know," the prince answered, "but it makes me feel I still matter." That day, the wind never stopped. It blew gently, steadily, in all directions. And with every whisper through those strange, ancient leaves, something stirred in the people. Old Marla, who had never borne children, clutched her chest and gasped, because she remembered the scent of a baby's hair, the ache of milk in her arms, the lullaby of someone who had once called her mother. A mason stopped carving when his chisel slipped and etched the name Eler into the stone, a name he didn't know, but remembered suddenly as the brother who had died in a war the kingdom swore never happened. Children began to hum songs their parents didn't know but wept at anyway. A man who had never left the village recalled a city of glass on a lake of stars. A woman began speaking a language no one had heard, but Mira understood every word. By dusk, The air was full of unspoken names. Rael wandered into the forest. The others followed. The trees did not resist. Instead, they leaned slightly, as if bowing. Inside, the light was wrong, golden as dusk, but soft as dawn. No shadows, only echoes. The deeper they walked, the more familiar it felt, though none had ever been there. Rael touched a tree. It was warm, and it whispered, not with sound, but memory. A voice he hadn't heard in years. His father, long buried, telling him about stars, about fear, about how sometimes forgetting is a kindness. Rael stumbled back. They hold what we left behind, he said. What we erased. They are memory made root, the girl replied. And now that the temple has been opened and the crown remembered, they are no longer content to hide. They came upon a clearing. In its center stood a stone altar, covered in moss, but growing from it, a flower, blooming in slow motion. Its petals shimmered with images. Mira stepped forward. She gasped. Inside the petals, she saw herself, older, smiling, holding a child with green eyes. That's not real, she whispered. It could be, the girl said. Or it was. The swordsman looked to the trees. Why now? He asked. Why all of it now? Rael answered without knowing why. Because the forest knows its name again, and now it wants to be remembered. The prince sat at the edge of the clearing. I remembered a grove once, he said quietly. In my dreams, in that temple, behind the throne. What was inside it? Mira asked. He looked up. A sword made of bone and memory. A throne without a king. A choice. What kind of choice? Rael asked. The prince didn't answer. They returned to the village in silence. But the people were not silent. They were remembering. A woman knocked on Rael's door that night, holding a letter. This is from my sister, she said. But I never had a sister. Not until today. And now I remember her perfectly. A boy whispered to Mira, my doll spoke to me. She told me about the fire, about the field, about the day I died. The blacksmith painted his hands with soot and drew a battlefield on the side of his house, a hill that never existed, under a flag that no country flew, and wept as he did it. By morning, the entire village had changed. Not in shape, in soul. They remembered things they had never lived, but believed them anyway. Rael stood in the square. The girl approached. She placed a stone in his hand, one of the same he had seen in the shrine. But this one was red, etched with 2 words, return it. To who? To the one who first gave it away. Rael looked to the forest. I don't know where to begin. You already have, she said. That night the wind stopped. The trees stood still, and the world held its breath, because for the first time since the forgetting, the forest had exhaled, and everyone remembered, even those who hadn't yet been born. The old monk had not spoken in 3 days. He sat cross-legged in his crumbling chamber behind the shrine, unmoving, his breath shallow, eyes half open, staring not at the walls or the sky, but at something far beyond both. The villagers left food by his door, which went untouched. Birds landed on his shoulders and flew away whispering. Rael, Mira, the girl, and the prince stood outside, uncertain. He's listening, said the girl. To what? Mira asked. Rael watched the monk's lips move slightly. A breath, a word, then stillness again. He's hearing what was hidden. That afternoon, as the sun burned low and gold across the hills, the monk moved. He turned his head slowly, looked at Rael, and beckoned him with a single raised hand. Rael entered. The others waited outside, silent. Inside, the monk's chamber was not as Rael remembered it. Or perhaps it never truly looked like anything one could remember. The walls rippled with strange etchings. Not paint, not ink, but something alive. Phrases curled and faded before the eyes could hold them. A map was carved into the floor, but its rivers didn't follow the landscape. The monk reached beneath a pile of old blankets and pulled out a scroll. It was black, not with dirt or ash, but black like something had removed the light from within it. Its casing was bone. Not human, not beast. Something older. He handed it to Rael. This was never meant to be found, the monk whispered. Rail hesitated. What is it? The map of silent rivers. He opened it. There were no mountains, no cities. Just veins of silver curling across deep parchment like roots twisting through void. They flowed in directions that defied sense, looping back, vanishing into themselves, ending in what looked like eyes or seeds or tears. The names along the rivers were in a language that felt familiar but unreadable. Rail blinked, and for a moment, the letters moved, reshaping into memories. A child kneeling beside a stream, washing away a name. A woman pouring her grief into the current. A prince throwing a crown into waters that hissed and turned to smoke. Rail gasped. The map wasn't land. It was memory. These rivers, he began, don't flow across the earth, the monk finished. They once flowed through the minds of men, and now they flow through you. Rail looked up. What do they lead to? The monk's voice cracked. To the beginning of the forest. Rail's blood chilled. You mean its roots? No, said the monk. Its purpose. Rail rolled the scroll shut. I thought the forest was a place. It was never a place. It was a spell. Rail's eyes widened. The monk nodded slowly. Long ago, when kings ruled with fire and memory was more dangerous than steel, there was something. An object, an idea, a truth so powerful that it had to be hidden. But not behind walls. Not beneath stone. That kind of protection can be broken. Rail whispered, so they hid it in forgetting. The monk's voice was little more than wind. They grew a forest from memory, and buried it there. So deep, not even gods could dig it out. The scroll pulsed in Rail's hand. But the spell frayed, said the monk, because memory cannot be buried forever. It finds ways to bloom. In dreams, in children, in cracks of grief. Rail felt the scar over his heart burn. And now, he asked, the rivers flow again, because someone is close to finding what the spell was meant to hide. Rail turned to leave. Then we need to find it first. The monk grabbed his wrist. His fingers were ice. Be careful, he whispered. The spell was not made to keep others out. It was made to keep the truth in. Rail stepped into the sunlight. The others gathered around. He unrolled the scroll on the ground. The girl knelt beside him. She reached toward one of the rivers. Her fingertip grazed it, and her eyes rolled back. Mira grabbed her. The girl inhaled sharply. I saw her, she whispered. Who? Rail asked. The one who sang the forest into being. They stared at her. She wove it from sorrow, from names people begged to forget. She sang the trees into place. Every root, every leaf, a piece of someone's shame or silence. And when it was done, she stepped into the center and vanished. Rail placed his hand on the scroll. A river pulsed beneath his palm. He saw a tower carved from bone. A mirror that reflected not faces, but moments you refused to admit. A tree that bore no fruit, only truths. And in the shadow of all three, the same crown. Always the crown. He pulled back. Mira frowned. The rivers don't just lead to the forest's heart. They lead to us. The prince stared at the scroll. I remember water, he said. It flowed upward. It sang when you stepped into it. Rail turned to him. Then you've seen the gate. The prince nodded. I just didn't know it was a gate. That night, the scroll glowed faintly under starlight. Rail watched it alone. The girl joined him. You feel it now, she said. Yes. It's waking. I know. They sat in silence. Then Rail asked, what happens if we find what the spell was hiding? The girl didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, then we must decide whether to remember it or bury it again. Rail touched the scroll. The rivers whispered. Not water, not wind, but names. Names of people who never lived, but who might if memory allowed it. He closed his eyes. And somewhere in the distance, the forest stirred, because one by one, the rivers were finding their way back. They walked without speaking. The forest had grown denser since the map was opened. The trees leaned inward as if listening. Every step stirred something unseen, Memories, maybe, or warnings. Even the birds had gone quiet, and the wind moved only where it was allowed. The deeper they ventured, the more the light shifted. Not darkness, exactly, but a heaviness that hung in the air like breath too long held. Rael led them, scroll in hand. The girl walked beside him, silent but alert. Mira followed close, her fingers brushing the hilt of a dagger she had never used but always carried. And behind them, the prince, sword drawn, face unreadable. They came to the base of the oldest tree. No one knew its name. No carving marked it. It had no fruit, no flowers, and yet its trunk was as wide as a house. Its bark was dark, etched with grooves that pulsed faintly, like veins. Its roots stretched in every direction, sinking deeper than thought itself. "This is where the rivers end," Rael whispered. "And where they begin," said the girl. The ground around the tree had shifted. Earth loosened. Roots pulled apart like threads. At the base, a hollow had opened, not dug, not carved, but formed, as if the tree had finally exhaled and revealed what it had long hidden. They climbed down. The air inside was still, damp, and full of old truths. They descended past roots that twisted like memory, past chambers lined with bark that murmured in forgotten tongues. Some whispered names. Others sang lullabies. One root dripped tears. At last, they reached the bottom. There was no light, but they could see. The chamber was round, pulsing with a soft silver glow. The walls were smooth, not of stone, not of wood, but something in between. In the center sat a woman, old yet ageless, draped in moss and shadow. Her eyes were blind and glowing, her mouth unmoving, her breath steady as the tide. Vines wrapped around her body, not trapping her, but connecting her, like a tree made of flesh and thought. She did not speak, yet they heard her. "You've come to remember, but you will not leave untouched." The words echoed not in air, but in bone. Rael stepped forward. "Are you the oracle?" She blinked slowly. "I am what remains when forgetting fails." The prince gripped his sword. The girl bowed her head. Mira said, "You see everything? Even what hasn't happened?" Rael asked, "Then why are we here?" The oracle raised her hand. In it, petals formed, each one bearing a moment. A man kneeling before a shattered crown. A child being born with eyes like silver moons. A village vanishing into fog. Rael whispered, "What are these?" "Choices. Futures. Dreams discarded like skins." The petals dissolved. The oracle's voice thickened. "The forest remembers too much. Isn't that its purpose?" Relaxed. To us. The pause. Until it began to feed. No one moved. The oracle opened her palm again. This time, no petals. Only flame. Within it, a tree burning from within. Leaves screaming. Roots writhing. It feeds on memory. And memory is pain. And pain is hunger. Rael stepped closer. What was it hiding? The oracle's eyes glowed brighter. A promise. To who? To a king who could not forget. And a queen who chose to. A long silence. Then the oracle looked at Rael. "You carry too much." He nodded. "Because no one else would." "You must let it go." "I can't." "Then you must plant it." Rael frowned. She pointed downward. The roots parted. A hole opened. Beneath it, a garden. But not like any garden he'd known. Flowers shaped like moments. Shrubs blooming with laughter. A single vine shaped like his mother's face. Rael knelt. "What do I do?" "Return what you were never meant to carry." He reached into his chest. Not physically. Through thought. Through scar. He touched the memory. The one that burned the deepest. The moment he had first touched the old woman's hand. And felt the forest awaken inside him. He pulled it forward. Held it in his palms. A single leaf. Glowing. He planted it. The garden trembled. The oracle sighed. "You have given something pure." Rael stood. Tears on his cheeks. Mira touched his arm. The girl whispered, "You're lighter now." The prince asked, "What happens next?" The oracle's glow dimmed. "The forest will resist. It fears forgetting as much as it fears memory." "Then we keep going," Rael said. The oracle looked at him. Then you must know this. There is a crown beneath the oldest stone, and it remembers your hands. Rael felt cold. Mira looked at him sharply. What does that mean? The oracle's vines began to retreat. The chamber darkened. You will understand when the river ends in fire. With that, the oracle lowered her hand and vanished into the roots. The chamber grew still. Only one word echoed as they climbed back up. Outside, the forest waited, and overhead, for the first time, no leaves moved, because the roots had spoken, and the memory of the crown had returned. The forest had grown louder, not with noise, but with presence. The kind that made windows rattle without wind. The kind that woke people from sleep with dreams they couldn't remember, only feel. The kind that stirred the old roots beneath houses and whispered names into hearts that hadn't burned in years. People spoke less. They no longer said, "the forest," as if it were a place. They said it like it was someone listening. Rael felt the change in his bones. The oracle's words clung to him like cold mist. There is a crown beneath the oldest stone, and it remembers your hands. He hadn't told anyone yet, not even Mira, but that silence had weight. And the girl noticed. She found him at the edge of the village, sitting beneath a crooked ash tree that had grown too fast, its trunk pulsing faintly in rhythm with his breath. She sat beside him without speaking, then reached into her cloak and withdrew something wrapped in cloth. Rael took it gently, unwrapped it slowly, and revealed a lantern, unlike any he had seen. Its frame was wrought from branches braided with memory, not metal, not wood, but something in between. The glass panels were cloudy, but shimmered when touched, showing faces that vanished too quickly to grasp. It was cold, yet pulsed faintly with life. Rael held it up. "What is it?" The girl's voice was soft. "A lantern made of tears." He blinked. She explained, "It lights only when someone cries for a memory they can't prove. A grief denied, a love erased, a moment lost between the lines of a story no one finished." Rael turned it in his hands. "Why give it to me?" "Because the forest is growing too fast," she said. "And this is how you'll see where it doesn't belong." That night, he walked with the lantern. Mira and the prince followed. They passed homes with shutters sealed tight and eyes peeking through cracks. The villagers didn't stop them, but they watched, always watching. At the well, Rael paused. He thought of the boy who had once drawn faces in the dust here, his younger self. He lifted the lantern. Nothing happened. Then Mira whispered, "This was where I remembered my brother." Rael turned to her. "I never had one," she continued, voice trembling. "But I remember his laughter." Her eyes welled. The first tear slipped down her cheek. The lantern lit, not with fire, with memory. A soft glow, pale blue. It spread through the glass, illuminating the street. On the wall beside them, shadows moved, children playing, a woman humming, a wooden sword raised in triumph. Rael gasped. "They're her memories," said the prince. "No," Mira said. "They're ours. They just haven't happened." They moved through the village, and everywhere they went, the lantern found sorrow. At the baker's shop, an old man sobbed when he remembered a wedding that was never held, with a woman no one else recalled. The lantern glowed. At the schoolhouse, a child cried without knowing why, only that he missed someone who hadn't yet been born. The lantern glowed brighter. By midnight, the sky above the village shimmered. Light poured upward from the lantern like smoke, and far above, the stars flickered in response. The girl whispered, "The past is leaking." Rael turned. "Is that dangerous?" She hesitated. "The forest is built on forgetting," she said. "Too much remembering, and the roots twist." Suddenly, the ground shook. A deep, rolling pulse. The trees outside the village groaned. The lantern's light surged, and a beam of memory shot into the sky. It didn't fade. It split. The villagers screamed. Because above them, in the clouds, shapes began to form. Faces. Scenes. Visions of the past, of things no one had spoken of in decades. A child drowning in a river. A soldier dropping a crown into fire. A queen screaming as her memory was torn from her by song. The prince fell to his knees. "That was my mother," he whispered, "but I never knew her." The lantern shook, then dimmed. Darkness fell like a curtain. The wind stopped, and the girl collapsed. Rael caught her. Mira knelt beside them. The girl's voice was a whisper. "It's too fast. The forest is waking too quickly." Rael asked, "Can we stop it?" The girl opened her eyes, and they were full of stars. "No," she said, "but we can guide it." They carried her to the tree at the village's edge, the one that had sprouted from the old woman's floorboards. It glowed now, not with light, but with memory. Each leaf shimmered with a different face. The girl touched the bark. The tree pulsed. Rael hung the lantern on one of its branches. It flared, and all at once, the tree breathed, not figuratively. It inhaled. Every light in the sky vanished into its trunk. The lantern dimmed, and silence returned. But in the silence, understanding. The forest wasn't attacking. It was remembering. Too much. Too fast. And if it continued, it would devour every boundary between what was and what wasn't. The girl looked at Rael. "You need to find the crown." He nodded. "The one beneath the oldest stone," Mira said. The prince unsheathed his sword. "Then we go to where the forgetting began." The villagers gathered at dawn and found the tree glowing with stories. Each leaf showed a moment, a song, a kiss, a farewell. They stood in silence because they had seen what they weren't meant to and remembered what had never been allowed. And now the forest was listening because the lantern had glowed and the sky had answered. Rael had been gone for only 3 days. 3 days since the lantern had lit the sky. 3 days since the oracle beneath the roots had whispered of crowns and memory, of rivers ending in fire. 3 days since the forest began to breathe like something alive. Now, standing on the dirt path that curved back toward the village where he'd lived all his life, Rael felt a strange chill. Not the kind brought by wind or cold, but by dissonance, like standing in a home where the walls had shifted while you slept. The trees around him had changed. Not in color, not in shape, but in arrangement, as though they'd stepped aside for him and closed the path behind. He walked slowly. Every footstep sank slightly deeper than it should. The birds didn't greet him. The air didn't recognize him. When the rooftops finally came into view, his heart lifted for a moment. The same, because it was all wrong. The village was still there, yes. The same crooked stone cottages, the same weather-beaten square, the same well where he'd once played with a wooden sword. But the well no longer had a crack in its rim. The schoolhouse, once slanted, now stood straight. And the ash tree that had grown by the baker's wall, where Mira had once carved her name, was gone. Rael stepped into the square. No one noticed him. He passed the seamstress who used to give him scraps of thread for his drawings. She didn't smile. He passed the stable boy he'd once saved from a wild dog. The boy looked through him like mist. At the door of his house, Rael hesitated, then knocked. His mother opened it and frowned. "Yes?" she asked. Rael felt his throat tighten. "It's me. It's Rael." She blinked. "Rael? I don't know any Rael." "It's your son," he said, voice shaking. She gave him a polite but puzzled smile. "I never had children." The door closed gently. Rael stumbled back. He ran to the healer's hut. Myra's room was empty. The old man inside had no apprentice. He barely looked up when Rael begged to know where she was. He tried the blacksmith, the tavern, even the shrine. None knew his name. None had ever heard of a boy with a red scar on his chest. Rael knelt in the square. His hand shook. His voice cracked. "What is this?" No answer, until a child approached. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her hair was too long, her eyes too still. She looked at him curiously. "You're not from here, are you?" Rael tried to speak. The girl reached into her pocket and held out a flower. It shimmered faintly, a memory bloom. "Someone left this on my doorstep this morning," she said. "I think it was for you." Rael took it. Images surged. The village, but not this one. His village. The true one. The way it had been. The woman who had raised him. Mira laughing in the garden. The lantern lighting the sky. The trees singing names. Then come. He gasped. The girl tilted her head. This place, it doesn't remember itself very well, she said. Some days it thinks it was built last week. Other days it thinks it's 100 years old. Rael asked, Who are you? She smiled faintly. I'm a branch. I what? A branch, she said again. From the tree. One that wandered. He stepped back. You came from the grove? She nodded. Before it became a grove. He ran. Not away. To the edge of the village. To the old woman's hut. But there was no hut. There was only a grove. Tall, silver-barked trees arranged in a perfect circle. Roots woven into the ground like a ritual. Flowers blooming in silence. In the center stood the tree that had grown from the floorboards. But now it was taller, wiser. Its trunk bore a faint carving, a leaf. And around its base were figures, not people. Statues. The prince. The girl. Each frozen in stone. Rael fell to his knees. No, he whispered. No, no, no. The statues didn't speak. But the tree did. Not with sound. With memory. It poured into him. Not like a stream. Like a flood. The moment the lantern had lit the sky, the forest had grown too fast. The past, once locked in roots and petals, had bled into the world. And the village, unable to bear what it had forgotten, had chosen to forget itself instead. To survive. It rewrote its own story. Erased Rael from it. Erased Mira. Erased the girl. And locked what it could not process in the grove. Where it could not be reached. Until now. Rael stood. And walked into the circle. The tree trembled. The statues shimmered. The carving glowed. Rael placed his hand on the bark. I remember, he said. The world stilled. The wind paused. And the statue of the girl blinked. Rael pulled her hand. Stone cracked. She gasped. The grove shifted. The statue of the prince crumbled, revealing the man beneath. Myra's eyes opened. She fell forward into Rael's arms. You pulled us out, she whispered. Rael nodded. I'm pulling the village too. They stood together. The tree pulsed, and the grove sang. Not with music, with truth. The villagers began to gather, drawn by something they didn't understand. One by one, they entered the grove, and each time a foot crossed the threshold, a memory returned. A face, a voice, a moment, and Rael's name. The forest didn't fight, because it remembered too. And now, at last, the village did again. Rael stood in the center, and looked at the tree. You tried to forget me, he said softly, and the tree replied. We had to. Rael nodded. But I remembered anyway. The light above shimmered. The grove bowed. And somewhere, beneath the roots of time, the past breathed out. Because the village that had forgotten it existed, now remembered everything. And the forest listened. Not to grow, but to learn. It began the same night the village remembered again. When the statues in the grove broke free, when the tree bent to Rael's voice, when forgotten names filled the mouths of children who had never learned them, that night, sleep became something else. Not escape, not rest, a gate. They didn't plan to share the dream. They simply did. Rael closed his eyes in the quiet of the temple ruins. Mira curled beside him, breathing slow, her fingers still wrapped in strands of root that glowed like fireflies. The girl, who still had no name, sat cross-legged, whispering to the air as if trying to anchor herself. The prince, silent, sword across his lap, watched the stars blink out one by one. And then the dream took them, all of them, not into chaos, into memory, but not their own. They stood in a hall too tall for reason, its columns made of knotted oaths and betrayals carved into stone that wept sap. The air shimmered with dust that sang, faintly, the names of battles never told aloud. At the center of the hall was a throne, emerald, twisting upward like vines frozen in agony. Empty. At its foot, a crown. Gold is but wrong. Its edges were thorned. Its base was cracked. And at its center, a gem blacker than night, pulsing with a heartbeat that was not its own. Rael stepped forward. Mira cried out, not in warning, in recognition. I've dreamed of this before, she whispered. "So have I," said the prince. The girl did not speak. She stared at the crown as if it knew her better than anyone had. Rael touched it. The hall dissolved. They fell, not down, not through, into someone else's past. A battlefield, soaked in rain and ash. A king, laughing madly, sword raised above his head, blood-soaked but untouched. Rael watched him and realized, horrified, that he knew the man's face. It was the prince, but younger. Not him. A version of him. Another dream. Another time. Another war. The king raised the crown, placed it upon his brow. The battlefield vanished. A feast hall appeared. Servants wept in corners. Dancers bled from their feet. Music played that had no melody, only rhythm, violent and sharp. The king smiled. He remembered his victories. All of them. But none of the cost. None of the lives. None of the mercy he didn't show. The dream cracked again. Another memory unfolded. The crown lying in a circle of roots. A woman with silver eyes whispering over it. "I'll hide you in forgetting," she said, "so you never poison another name again." Rael reached out. The woman turned. Her face was blurred, her voice hollow, but the words struck deep. "You carry the seed of him, the one who forgot everything except power." Rael gasped. The prince turned to him. "Is that me?" he asked. "I don't know," Rael whispered. The dream twisted, and they stood once more before the crown. But now the hall had changed. Overgrown, empty. Vines curled through the stone. Roots had split the emerald throne. The crown still rested there, but covered in moss, glowing faintly beneath layers of time. Then Rael understood. The forest had not been born to protect the crown. It had been created to bury it, to hold it in a dream no one could reach unless they carried parts of it in their blood, in their grief, in their longing. Mira spoke first. "The crown, it makes kings remember only what justifies them." The prince looked pale, and forget everything that would humble them. Rael said nothing, because he felt it, the pulse, in his chest, not from the scar, from deeper. He had felt it his whole life. That pull toward memory, toward truth, toward pain. The forest had chosen him because he could carry what the crown erased. He turned to the girl. "Whose dream is this?" She did not answer. Rael stepped toward the crown again. But this time, when he touched it, he didn't fall. He remembered. A boy in a cradle of roots. A lullaby hummed by a woman who cried as she sang. A voice whispering, "He must never wear it. He must never know." A baby's hand glowing faintly. Rael staggered back. "It was planted in me," he said. "The dream, the crown, the memory." The prince looked away. Mira reached for him. "What do we do?" Rael faced them all. "We find where this dream was born. We find the roots that hold it, and we burn them." The hall trembled. The crown glowed, and the dream began to collapse. They woke, gasping, choking, eyes full of light and tears. The forest outside was screaming, not in words, in wind, in creaking limbs, in leaves that fell like warnings. Rael stood. "I know where it is." Mira steadied herself. "Where?" "In someone's memory." The girl looked at him, her eyes full of sorrow. "Mine." Rael froze. "You buried it?" She nodded. "I was made to, shaped for it. I held the forest in my skin, the memory in my breath. I forgot my name so the crown would forget itself." The prince stepped back. "So we have to destroy her?" Rael shook his head. "No, we have to go into her memory." The trees bent forward, listening, waiting, because the crown had stirred, and memory would not be silent any longer. The rain began just before dusk. It was not a storm, not wind-driven or violent, but soft, steady, and endless. The kind of rain that felt older than sky. It fell only within the grove, touching no other part of the village, as though the clouds remembered where they were supposed to weep and nowhere else. Rael stood at the edge, unmoving. Behind him, Mira held the map of silent rivers. The girl with no name sat with her eyes closed, humming a tune no one had taught her. The prince stood at the gate of the grove, sword at his back. his hands no longer steady. No one spoke. They all felt it, a presence forming inside the rainfall, just beyond the trees. And then he stepped out. The knight. He did not walk as mortals do. He moved like someone remembering how. Armor rusted but not crumbling. His cloak soaked but never dragging. His eyes, not human, not truly. They shimmered like mirrors facing each other, endless and looping. Where he stepped, puddles formed, but the water did not reflect the present. It reflected different times, different versions. In one, the village burned. In another, it stood grand and gold-roofed. In one, Rael was crowned. In another, he was a child buried under stone. He carried no banner, no sigil, only a blade wrapped in cloth. Rael's throat tightened. "Who are you?" The knight stopped 10 paces away, and the rain grew heavier over him, but never touched the others. His voice was calm. "Certain. I am the one who remembers what memory rejected." Rael stepped forward. "You were in the dream." "I've been in all of them." Rael blinked. "Why now?" The knight removed his helm. His face was not old, but ancient. Not weathered, but worn by meaning. Eyes gray as river fog, mouth unmoved by centuries. "Because you are the final memory." The rain pulsed once, like a breath. Rael whispered, "What does that mean?" The knight's gaze locked on his. "I remember every version of this world. The ones that rose and fell, the ones that were imagined but never born. I stood at the gates of forgotten cities. I bled for kings that never ruled. I buried queens that never lived. I was sworn to guard the point where all those stories met." He stepped closer. "The forest." Rael didn't move. The knight continued. "The crown was buried to end the cycle. The forest was grown to cradle the forgetting. But memory always finds a crack. You are that crack." Mira stepped beside Rael. He didn't ask for this. The knight looked at her, not unkindly. "No one ever does." The girl rose. "You served the first king," she said. "The one who tried to wear the crown and remember everything." The knight nodded. "I held his hand as he wept. I held his sword as he fell. I held his name when even the sky forgot it." Rael stepped forward. "Why are you here now?" The knight unwrapped the blade. It was not metal. It was made of rain. It dripped, not water, but fragments, tiny glimmers of scenes, places, moments. A child born beneath 2 moons. A bridge built of stars. A funeral held in reverse. He placed the sword at Rael's feet. "You must carry this," he said. Rael shook his head. "I'm not a knight." "No," said the man. "You are worse. You are a witness." Mira touched Rael's arm. "Don't take it," she said softly. "He's giving you more than steel." Rael stared at the blade, then picked it up. It was cold, but not painful. It was heavy, but not with weight. The knight exhaled, and the rain lessened, slightly. The prince stepped forward. "What now?" The knight turned to him. "You were supposed to die in a different world," he said. "You were meant to fall before the gates, wearing the crown, drunk on your own victories. But you turned away." "I had help," the prince said. The knight nodded. "The stories are changing. That's why I can't hold them anymore." Rael asked, "Then what happens to you?" The knight looked up at the sky. "I end." He stepped backward into the grove. The rain surrounded him, and then he was gone. Rael gripped the blade. It pulsed in his hand, and a vision overtook him. The entire forest, as it once was, before forgetting, before crowns, before war. It was not a place. It was a breath, a story waiting to be told, but never spoken. He came back to himself. The grove stood silent. Mira looked to the blade. "It's made of memory." Rael nodded. "The kind we're not supposed to carry." The girl stepped forward. "It will lead us to the crown, not through paths, through the roots of truth." Rael turned toward the forest, toward the place where the past had buried its most dangerous promise. And behind him, the puddles left by the night reflected no one, because he had guarded the rain. And now that task belonged to Rael. They walked in silence now, not because there was nothing to say, but because there were too many truths waiting to be spoken, and none of them could bear to be first. The forest was different since the night had vanished. Not darker, not brighter, just older. As if the trees had been watching from the beginning, and now, at last, they recognized who walked beneath them. Rail led, the rain-forged blade strapped across his back. Mira stayed close, eyes sharp, heart heavy. The prince followed without speaking, and the girl walked barefoot, eyes half-lidded, humming a tune that only the roots seemed to understand. They came upon the mirror at dusk. It stood alone in a clearing where nothing grew. Not a single leaf. No moss, no wildflower. Only stone, cracked and dry as old parchment. And in the center, the mirror. It had no frame. It floated an inch above the ground, unmoving, untouched by wind or time. Its surface was too smooth, too still. It reflected nothing. Not trees, not sky, not even them. Rail stepped toward it. Mira grabbed his arm. Wait! But the girl nodded. He must. Rail took another step. Then the mirror changed. It showed him, not his face, his names. Traitor, a child in torn clothes, standing before a burning door, whispering promises he'd never keep. Savior, an older version of himself, pulling a blade from the throat of a tyrant who begged for mercy too late. Murderer, blood on his hands. Not war blood, quiet blood. Someone unarmed, someone forgotten. A choice made in desperation. A scream that didn't echo. Prophet, eyes glowing with truths no one wanted. Speaking words that made kings shudder. Alone on a mountain of silence. Rail gasped. He turned away, but the mirror followed. It floated around him, always reflecting a name. Always waiting. The prince stepped forward. What is this thing? The girl's voice was quieter than usual. The mirror of unspoken names. Every version of yourself that was whispered in fear or shouted in anger. Every title you ran from. Mira said, so it judges us? No, the girl said. It reveals what others gave you and what you never returned. Rail looked again. This time, the mirror showed him a boy smiling. Then a young man staring into fire. Son. Then a figure kneeling in a grove. Rail flinched. What does that mean? Mira asked. The girl placed her hand on the glass, and the mirror froze, then changed. One image now, but older, wearing the crown. His face was unreadable. His eyes held pain and peace in equal measure. The name beneath it shimmered, but only one, the one Rail had forgotten. Tell me, he said. The girl whispered, you were born to be the vault. The what? The vessel, she said. The last place where the truth could hide. Not because you were powerful, because you were kind, because you remembered things others couldn't carry. Rail stared at the name. He couldn't read it, but he knew it. It tasted like sorrow. It burned like joy. It weighed like duty. He placed his hand on the mirror, and it cracked. Not broken, opened. The mirror split down the center, and behind it was a door. Not stone, not wood. A curtain of memory woven from tears and breath. Rail turned to the others. They nodded. He stepped through, and the world behind him forgot him again. He stood now in a forest that pulsed with truth. The trees whispered only his name, the one he had denied. He spoke it aloud. The sky bent in silence, and the crown beneath the oldest stone opened its eyes, because now it knew who was coming, and who had remembered everything. The earth trembled, but only beneath the forest. The sky dimmed not from clouds, but from memory. It was as if the air itself remembered something terrible, and now refused to shine. Rail emerged from the veil behind the mirror of unspoken names. His breath was shallow. Each step forward was like walking against the weight of forgotten centuries. The forest was no longer made of trees. It was a cathedral of memories. Branches curled like reaching hands. Leaves shimmered like pages. Bark pulsed like skin. Every living thing had become a fragment of someone's past, singing, weeping, fighting, whispering. And then, without warning, the oracle stood before him. She had not aged. Her robe of roots dragged behind her, and her eyes burned silver, not with light, but with knowing. "You came alone," she said. "I had to," Rael answered. She nodded. "Then it's time you heard the truth." Rael stepped closer. The ground beneath his feet cracked open, revealing a glowing thread of memory beneath the soil, as if veins of the forest ran with emotion instead of blood. "The forest," the oracle began, "was not born. It was built." Rael listened in stillness. It was meant to hold memories too painful for mortals, a sanctuary for sorrow. But sorrow, when left untouched for too long, begins to hunger. The trees around them leaned in. It began to grow not just from memory, but from need. It wanted to be remembered, needed it, and soon it wanted more. Rael's hand brushed the hilt of the rain-forged blade. The oracle whispered, "It wanted worship." Rael frowned. How can memory want to be a god? Because it believed that if enough people believed in what never happened, the oracle said, it could overwrite what did. Rael's chest tightened. It wanted to replace truth? She nodded. It is a failed god, a creature born not of creation, but erasure. Every lie believed, every truth ignored, every name twisted by rumor. That is what shaped the forest. It does not forget because it is merciful. It forgets because it is afraid of pain. Around them, the trees shivered. "And now," Rilette, "now," she said, "it grows too fast, too deep. It is rewriting not just what happened, but what could have." Rael stared into the woods. His village, his mother, his friends, even the old woman with moss-stained hands, they were becoming ghosts in a place that wanted to unwrite them. "What does it want from me?" "You," the oracle said, "are the last memory it cannot touch. You carry the truth of the crown, of the first king, of the sword made of rain. It needs you to choose, worship it or destroy it." Rael whispered, "If I worship it, you live," she said. "But the world you remember will vanish, replaced by the forest's version of events. And if I destroy it?" She looked away. "Then everything it holds will be released. The grief, the rage, the forgotten wars, the unnamed lovers, the broken promises. The forest is not evil, Rael. It is a wounded god, one that bled so much history, it tried to become one." Rael's hands trembled. The oracle stepped aside. Behind her, a path opened, made of memory. Every stone was a face, every step a whisper. The path led to a throne not carved, but grown, from bark and bone and time. Rael walked toward it, and the forest spoke. "You know me," it said, "not in words, but in thought. I am the lullaby your father sang wrong. I am the promise your mother forgot. I am the battle that was never won, but celebrated. I am the guilt buried under poetry." Rael didn't answer. The forest continued. "I do not want to harm. I want to replace. Let me be the story. Let me be the god. And I will never let you feel sorrow again." Rael stepped closer to the throne. The crown hovered above it, the one buried in memory, shaped from roots and fire and forgotten prayers. "Put it on," the forest said, "and I will become truth. Your truth." Rael reached for it. The blade at his back pulsed. And suddenly he remembered, a child who died in a war no one spoke of. A sister who never came back from the river. A name carved on a stone no one visited. He closed his eyes. "I don't want a perfect world," he said. "I want a true one." And he swung the sword. It did not cut wood or stone. It cut memory. It sliced through illusion. The trees screamed. The roots shook. The sky broke open with voices, all the ones that had been silenced, now roaring like thunder. The forest writhed. "Why?" it asked. "Why do you choose pain?" Rael shouted, "Because pain is real, and real things deserve to be remembered." And with that, the sword shattered, and so did the forest. It didn't burn. It didn't vanish. It wept, and in its weeping it let go. Rael fell to his knees. The oracle came beside him. "You did what no one else could." He looked at her. "Did I win?" She smiled softly. "No one wins against memory, but you reminded it that forgetting isn't healing. It's hiding. Rael stood. The grove was still, but this time it was peaceful, not erased, remembered. The wind did not stir the trees that morning. The grove stood still, not in peace, but in dread. Its silence was not the silence of calm. It was the hush before truth demanded to be heard. Rael stood at the edge of it, flint in one hand, soaked rags in the other. Behind him stood Mira, the girl from the painting, and the prince with no past. The oracle was gone, vanished with the dawn. Perhaps her work was done. Perhaps she had simply faded back into the soil where old truths rested. They had returned to the grove with a single decision. It had to end. This forest, this living lie, stitched together from forgotten names, twisted memories, and comforting delusions, had to be unmade. Not out of vengeance, but for the sake of the world that waited beyond it. The longer it lived, the more reality bent around it. And Rael had learned the cost. He'd seen the mirror. He'd seen the throne. He'd heard the voice of the forest when it pretended to be a god. He had carried memory like a sword. Now he would carry it like a flame. He dropped the torch to the dry root. The fire caught. It was quiet at first. A whisper, then a crackle. But instead of orange and red, the flame bloomed blue, like the cold truth of forgotten pain. The fire didn't spread like it should. It flickered and danced, curling around certain roots, leaping over others. It moved like it had a mind. And it burned strange things, the names no one spoke, the events that never truly happened, the faces carved in falsehood. The blue fire consumed the forest lies. But the real memories, the terrible, beautiful, broken ones, stood untouched. Mira whispered, "It's choosing." Rael shook his head. "No, it's remembering." The girl touched the base of a charred tree. Its bark fell away to reveal the drawing of a woman, not sketched by hands, but shaped by remembrance. She wore a crown of vines and wept petals from her eyes. "She died in childbirth," the girl said softly. Her husband rewrote her into a painting to forget the grief. But her pain stayed. The fire passed over the tree and spared it. Rael took a step deeper into the grove. The flame followed him, not in destruction, in discernment. Each step he took, the fire grew brighter, bluer, hotter, but never wild, never cruel. At one tree, a memory bloomed in the bark, a child laughing, then silence. The flame flickered, the bark blackened, but the laughter echoed once more before fading, like a goodbye it had never been allowed to give. At another, a name, Elric, whispered in windless air. A name no one had called in centuries. A name the forest had buried to protect someone from guilt. Rael watched the fire burn it away. Not the name, the shame. The truth remained. Mira asked, "Will it stop?" Rael didn't answer. He was walking with the flame now, side by side. It did not burn his skin. It clung to him like purpose, like memory made flesh. The prince followed. He reached a tree whose bark bore a crown, his crown. The one from dreams, from the emerald throne, from a kingdom that had never existed. Or had it? The blue fire rose high. Rael turned to the prince. "Do you want to know?" The prince hesitated. "What if I was a tyrant?" "Then you deserve to remember, because no one changes by forgetting." The prince placed his hand on the tree, and it opened. Inside was not gold or power. Inside was a battlefield, a memory of a king kneeling beside a dying friend. Not from ambition, from a war he couldn't stop. The crown had been a burden, not a prize. The prince wept, and the fire spared the memory. Rael whispered, "That's how we burn it. Not by destroying what was real, but by making peace with it." The grove quaked. The trees shook their branches in resistance. The forest screamed, not in words, in broken lullabies, unfinished stories, half-spoken prayers. It was terrified, not of death, of exposure. Rael called out, "You don't have to die, but you cannot lie." The fire rose to the sky. Then it dropped, a wave of blue flame rushing across the grove. And every false memory, every illusion, every rewritten history vanished. Some trees collapsed into dust. Some stood taller than before. and in the middle of it all stood the tree that had grown in the old woman's hut. Now it was a towering monument of bark, shaped like a human spine, wrapped in weeping vines and blooming with petals that sang when the wind touched them. Rael walked to it. The girl followed. She said, "This is where it began." He placed his hand on the trunk, and he saw the old woman, younger, standing in the original forest, holding a dying child. Her child. She had begged the gods to let her forget, and the gods had answered by building her a forest of forgetting. From her grief, it grew. From her sorrow, it spread. Rael whispered, "It was never evil, just broken." The girl nodded, and broken things must be healed, not erased. He turned to the fire. One final time, he let it rise. But this time, it did not burn. It became light, a memory not to erase, but to honor. The grove shimmered. The false forest was gone. What remained was real. Even the pain, especially the pain. And for the first time since the first sorrow, the wind finally stirred the trees. Rael stood in the clearing where the forest had once tried to become a god. The trees no longer whispered lies. The blue flame had passed, not as a destroyer but as a revealer, and what it left behind shimmered with an eerie stillness. Not empty, not desolate, but bare. Truth stood where illusion once towered. This was no longer a forest of forgetting. It had become a cathedral of memory. Around him, trees carried no longer twisted bark or bleeding vines, but shapes, faces, echoes. One bore the imprint of a lullaby sung too late. Another, the final steps of a soldier who never came home. A third hummed with a mother's prayer that had gone unanswered for 50 years. But none of them spoke now. They watched. Rael stepped to the center of it all, a circle of silver roots and petrified leaves. At its heart was a pool, as if the world had wept into the earth and made a mirror from its tears. He looked in and saw every memory the forest had gathered. They didn't come as images or voices. They came as feelings, lives, choices, moments, rushing through him like wind through broken windows. The girl, Mira, who had once stepped out of a painting, now stood behind him. Her feet didn't touch the ground anymore. Her eyes shimmered with light that had never belonged to this world. She was not flesh. Not anymore. The prince approached too, crownless, but regal still. No blade at his hip, only silence in his gaze, a silence that carried the weight of someone who remembered too much and had finally made peace with it. And then came the old woman. She walked slowly, her back bent, her fingers trembling, but her eyes were steady. "I remember now," she said softly. Rael turned to her. "Who are you?" "I was the first," she replied. "I begged the gods to let me forget my son, and they gave me the forest. But it wasn't a gift. It was a mirror. It showed the world what forgetting does." Rael's voice cracked. "Then you're—" She smiled faintly. "I'm every mother who buried a name. I'm every soul who wanted to forget pain. I'm the seed of this place." Mira stepped closer. "And now it's time." Rael looked back at the pool. Within it swirled the memories of thousands, lives forgotten by others, choices erased by fear, truths buried beneath comfort. But also within it were three shapes. The girl, the prince, the old woman. He understood now. They were not separate. They were fragments. Mira was the memory of wonder, the curiosity of childhood, the hope of stories not yet told. The prince was the memory of burden, the weight of leadership, the grief of decisions that couldn't be undone. And the old woman, she was the memory of love twisted by loss. The reason the forest began. Each had grown their own form. Each had wandered, but they had always been one story. His story. The forest had not only preserved forgotten memories, it had borne part of Rael himself. Every time he dreamed, every time he questioned what was real, every time he touched the bark and felt pain, he had been touching pieces of himself. "You must choose," Mira said. Rael whispered, "Choose what?" The prince answered, "What to carry, what to leave behind." The old woman added, "What to plant and what to bury." Rael turned back to the pool. It shimmered, showing him himself, not as he was, but as he could have been. As a boy who never found the scar. As a boy who ignored the old woman. As a boy who let the forest fade instead of following it. Then it showed him as he was now, marked, burdened, changed. "I never asked for this," he murmured. "No one does," said Mira. "But you answered it," said the prince. The forest didn't speak anymore. It had said all it could. Now it watched. Rael closed his eyes and stepped into the pool. He did not sink. He remembered his father's hands, his mother's voice, the ache of not knowing what was real, the joy of discovering it anyway. He remembered the first time he saw the blue flame, the first time the tree whispered, the first time the girl smiled, the first time the prince cried. He remembered everything. The pool began to glow. Mira began to fade. "Wait," he said. She smiled. "I was only meant to guide you. But you were real to me." She touched his hand. "Then let me stay as a story." She vanished into light. The prince bowed. "My time is done." Rael's chest ached. "You were my courage." "No," the prince said. "I was yours to begin with. You simply lent me form." And he too disappeared. Only the old woman remained. She stepped into the pool with him. "Will you remember me?" she asked. Rael's voice cracked. "Always." She leaned forward and kissed his forehead. "Then the forest is safe." And she was gone. The pool dimmed. Rael stood alone. But not empty. He carried them now, not as illusions, but as memories that had chosen to stay. Not because they were easy, because they were true. He walked out of the circle. The trees bowed. The wind returned. The sky lightened. And the forest was no longer trying to become a god. It had become something far more sacred, a memory that chose to be remembered. Rael stood where the last memory had settled. The pool was gone. The circle of silver roots had faded into soil. The blue flame no longer flickered. There was no girl beside him now, no prince or old woman. The forest no longer reached for his soul with greedy fingers. It no longer hungered for forgetting. But the air was full of something else. Stillness. Not the stillness of silence, but the stillness of listening, as though the very world waited for one last sound to unlock what it had always wanted to be. Rael had seen everything, carried everything. He bore the weight of thousands of stories, stories of sorrow, longing, rage, hope, sacrifice. Names that had never been spoken aloud now lived in him. They pulsed in his chest like a second heart. But the forest, what was left of it, had changed. The twisted trees, once drunk on forgotten truths, now stood calm and open. Their bark no longer bled. Their leaves shimmered softly, as though made from old hymns and morning light. And above them, the sky had turned a deeper blue, the kind of blue you only see after something sacred has passed through the earth. Rael didn't know how long he had been standing, but he knew what he had to do. He opened his mouth, and he sang, not like a bard or minstrel, not with words. He sang with memory. He let the feeling rise from the base of his spine to the back of his throat. He let every pain, every truth, every name echo through him. His song did not rhyme. It did not follow any tune known to men. But the trees bowed, the wind slowed, and one by one, the memories that once clung to him like shadows lifted, not vanishing, but changing. They became warmth. They became stories. And as Rael sang, the forest answered, not with sound, with light. The trunks turned translucent. The roots shimmered. The leaves floated upward like feathers caught in moonlight. The entire grove lifted into the air, into memory, into history. The trees dissolved. The sky opened. And all that remained was Rael. And the story. He fell to his knees, not in pain, in release. The song had carried everything away, not erased it, freed it. The cursed crown that had once twisted kings into liars turned to dust. The mirror of unspoken names cracked, and in its broken pieces, only forgiveness remained. The temple flowers withered gently, no longer needing to bloom to be remembered. Myra's laughter, the girl's light, danced on the breeze one last time, then faded like a lullaby at the edge of sleep. The prince's hand on his shoulder returned for just a breath, strong, steady, then disappeared. And in the distance, from the edge of the mountain valley, a village stirred. A bell rang, not in alarm, in remembrance. Rail rose and walked. He crossed the field where no trees stood now, only memory-softened soil. His feet touched earth that had once been lies. Now it was truth. He passed stones carved with forgotten names, now whole again. He stepped over the roots of stories that had ended not in destruction, but in music. The village gate stood open. No one remembered him. Not at first. But as he walked the familiar path, past the weaver's hut, past the old market square, past the bench where he once sat and watched the sky, people turned. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. In their eyes, something stirred. The baker looked at him and blinked, as though seeing a boy he thought had moved away long ago. The blacksmith stopped hammering, stared, and smiled, though he didn't know why. And Rail walked on. When he reached his mother's house, the one with ivy up the stone, the one where he first drew a tree on a scrap of linen, she stood at the door. She said nothing. She opened her arms. And he wept. He wept for everything and nothing. For the girl who had stepped out of the painting. For the prince who gave up his throne to remember. For the old woman who began it all just by loving too much. For himself. Later, they found him sitting under the sky. The stars had begun to return. The forest was no more. But it had left behind its gift. Not memory as weight, memory as song. Some said that night, the stars moved closer. That if you listened carefully, you could hear them humming the song Rail had sung. Others said they dreamed of names they didn't know, but woke with peace in their hearts. And a child born the next day had a mark on her chest, the shape of a red maple leaf. But the most curious thing was this. At the far edge of the valley, where no one had walked in years, something small had taken root. Not a curse, not a spell, just a tree. Thin, gentle. Its leaves shimmered silver and red. And when the wind passed through it, it sang. And now, the forest sleeps. But memories? They never truly fade. If this story touched something inside you, a forgotten name, a dream half remembered, a feeling you can't explain, then you were part of it all along. There are more lands like this. More stories buried in time. More secrets waiting just beyond the veil of legend. Subscribe now and step into the next forgotten world. Because on this channel, we don't just tell stories, we awaken them.